الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. We had discussed the Prophet's building of the masjid of the Prophet and the Masjid of Quba, and we had discussed other incidents that occurred in the early months of his immigration. The next major story, which is going to be the topic of today's halaqah, the next major incident of the early Madani period is the Treaty of Medina, the Treaty of Medina. And the Treaty of Medina is a very significant, and it's also a little bit controversial. People have interpreted it in many different ways. So what exactly is this treaty and who mentions it? One of the problems that we have about this treaty is that it doesn't seem to be mentioned in every single reference book. And those that mention it, sometimes they mention it without a chain of narrators or isnad. So we all know what is the most famous book of Seerah. By now every one of you should know. What is the most authoritative classical book? Seerah of Ibn Hisham, but Ibn Hisham is the summary of Ibn Ishaq. Every one of you should know this, right? So when you go back to the Seerah of Ibn Ishaq mentions the entire treaty, but he says it has been narrated to me. And between him and the Prophet is 150 years, right? So we don't have any direct isnad. Other early books sometimes mention this treaty as well, but again without a full chain of narrators. Some of the books of hadith, so for example Musnad Imam Ahmad, it has a phrase of this treaty that Imam Ahmad mentions, that the Prophet ﷺ كَتَبَ كِتَابًا بَيْنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ. He wrote a book between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, and this book mentioned in it that every one of them would take care of their own debts and their own issues and problems, and there will be islah and ma'ruf between them. So Imam Ahmad mentions one phrase of the treaty. The problem comes, as we said, there is no early book that mentions the whole treaty with an isnad. And this has led some people to doubt there ever was a treaty. They say there's no evidence for this treaty to have taken place. However, many modern researchers say, even if there's no chain of narrators, when you look at this treaty and the language of the treaty, it's a very archaic language, a language that is not common in the time of even Ibn Ishaq. So if somebody were to fabricate it, he wouldn't have fabricated it with such a difficult language. And therefore, the majority of scholars of our times consider this treaty to be an authentic treaty. And we're not going to discuss every single clause because it takes up 5 pages. Nobody's going to go over every single clause. What we're going to do is we're going to break up the treaty into 4 areas or 4 different issues that the Prophet ﷺ tackled. Number 1, the first issue is everything related to the Muslims. Number 2, everything related to the Jews. Number 3, everything related to the mushrikun, the pagans. And number 4, general treaties for all of these. Right? So we're going to divide this whole treaty into 4. And the problem comes that the treaty, as I said, is written in a very difficult language, and it is composed of sentences, that's it. That the Prophet ﷺ said this, and he said this, and he said this, and he said this. And a lot of what is mentioned are the names of tribes that we don't even know anymore. Because you realize that when we say the Ansar are in fact multiple tribes, primarily the Aus and the Khazraj, but there were more than the Aus and the Khazraj. And within the Aus and the Khazraj, there are at least 40, 50 sub-tribes. And most of these sub-tribes, we don't have much details of their names. So this treaty mentions every one of these names, every single name, which is in fact a sign of its authenticity actually, right? And it mentions every one of these names and what is required of this sub-tribe, what is to be done. The same applies for the Yahud. We think that there were only 3 Jewish groups. No, this is being generic. In fact, there were within these 3 subgroups as well. Because we have mentioned many times that a large tribe is divided into a sub-tribe. So the point being, this is a difficult treaty that's probably a sign of its authenticity. What we're going to do, simplify it. How are we going to simplify? Discuss it from different angles, 4 different angles. Number 1, clauses related to the Muslims amongst themselves. Of the clauses, the Prophet ﷺ is saying in this treaty that the mu'minun from the Quraysh and Yathrib, notice here the term Yathrib is used. And this in fact is a sign of its authenticity, because right early on when the Prophet ﷺ immigrated, we would have assumed that the term Yathrib was still in vogue. Right when the Prophet ﷺ immigrated, we said many times that the Prophet ﷺ eventually commanded the name Yathrib to be removed. And he said, do not call it Yathrib. It is in fact Medina. But it takes a while, obviously, right? It's not going to happen instantaneously. You cannot change the name of a city. The very fact that the term Yathrib occurs in this treaty shows that he's talking to people who are not used to a new name. So he has to use the old name. And therefore he mentions the believers from the Quraysh and from Yathrib, i.e. the Ansar. The term Muhajir and Ansar hasn't yet crystallized. Right? The believers from the Quraysh and from Yathrib and those who join them are one ummah. So now he is saying the Muslims are one ummah. And ummah, of course, we'll talk about it, but it means group or nation or party. And this ummah, he said, is in and unto itself, i.e. it is unique to itself to the exclusion of the rest of mankind. So the Prophet is saying this is a unique ummah. You have bonds that nobody else can share. And he then mentions 40 sub-tribes, as we said. He mentions every one of them. The Muhajirun by name, the Banu Auf, the Banu Harith, the Banu Sa'ida, on and on again. And he says, every one of these sub-tribes will be left with their own responsibilities that they had before Islam. They shall take care of their own blood money disputes, their own prisoners of war, and their own poor. Now this is an interesting clause. And in the Islamic state of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in this early state, the welfare system as we're used to was not national. It was local. If somebody needed help, they wouldn't go to the national level. They would keep to their tribal level. Right? They keep it to a tribal level. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, if there is somebody who's in need, somebody who's poor, who's going to take care of that person? That person's tribe. If there's somebody who needs to be ransomed, from a prisoner of war ransomed, who's going to pay the ransom? That tribe. If there's somebody who has blood money, now blood money is an exorbitant amount. In our times, I think it's 150,000 riyals, maybe like $40,000, $50,000, right? If you, blood money, of course, there's accidental and there's intentional, and each one is its own. Suppose in the Sharia court, in the Sharia system, if you accidentally kill somebody, manslaughter, car accident, you drive into him accidentally, the Sharia requires you to fast 2 months and to give a blood money to the person whom you killed. Right, this is the blood money. The blood money is 100 camels or 120 camels depending on the exact type of what you've done. And this is a huge amount. And one person cannot afford 100 camels. So what is to be done? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, every tribe takes care of its own. You are responsible for your own. Another clause, all of the Muslims shall unite against those who do injustice, even if it be one of their own. So this means if somebody does dhulm, even if he's a Muslim, we will be united against the zalim. And this actually goes back to the treaty. Which treaty? Who can remind me? No, Hudaybiyah is way afterwards. The Hilf al-Fudul. Hilf al-Fudul. Goes back to Hilf al-Fudul. That everybody will be united against the zalim, even if they're one of our own. Right? So the process I'm saying, whoever does dhulm, injustice, we will be united against him. And the final clause we'll mention for this, and again this is very long, but the final clause for the Muslims, that the Prophet ﷺ said the protection granted by the Muslims is the same. The word for protection in Arabic is dhimma. And even the lowliest of them can give protection. What is the concept of dhimma? So again, in that Islamic state, how did somebody get a visa to enter Darul Islam? How did somebody get a visa to come inside? Right? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, every Muslim has the right to give anybody whom they know this visa. Even if they are the lowliest of them, meaning even if they're not even free, even if they are a slave, even if it's a child who's aqil, a child who understands, like not a 3-year-old, but a 8, 9-year-old, right? This is the majority opinion. Even a child who is tamyiz, who is mumayyaz, he has the permissibility to allow somebody to come in. And if somebody comes in with that visa, what does this mean? It means nobody can harm him. Nobody can harm him. And if there are disputes, it goes to the court of law. But basically, anybody can tell anybody else to come in. And this is how the process made it. That the dhimma of the Muslims is all the same. Anybody can give dhimma to others. Anybody can give protection to others. And this shows us that when it comes to this issue, all Muslims are exactly the same. And of course, the main issue here is that the Prophet is making the Muslims one ummah to the exclusion of all mankind. He said, ummatan min dunin nas. So he's establishing the bonds of the ummah. The second set of clauses are clauses related to the Yahud. And he mentions the Yahud of the Bani Auf, and the Yahud of the Bani Amir, and the Yahud of the Bani this, and the Yahud of the Bani that. So all of the Yahud are mentioned by name specifically. And there are again around 12 different clauses. Everyone is mentioning a tribe name. The Prophet ﷺ said, all of these Yahud are one ummah along with the believer. And he then went on, and they shall take care of their own affairs, their own internal disputes. They will take care of their own fuqara. They will take care of their own blood money. Anything that is happening between them, they are in charge of it. Internal crime, internal murder, they are in charge. Unless they wish to come to us, otherwise we have no business with them. Unless it involves the two together. If there's dhulm, if there's murder between the two ummahs, now it will go to the higher authority. Right? So notice here, courts of law are semi-independent. The Yahud, you deal with yourselves. We're not going to get involved about your own affairs. Two people fighting, two people slandering, two people stealing, murder happens, that's your business. You deal with it yourself, internal division, don't come to us. Unless it's between the two of us, right? Something happens between the two, then obviously we need to come to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said that between the two, i.e. the Muslims and the Jews, shall be mutual support against those who fight the people of this treaty. And the Yahud will spend along with the Muslims as long as they're being fought. Financial obligations when it comes to external enemies are the same. Notice, financial obligation when it comes to domestic affairs are not the same. You're poor, you take care of them, not us. Our poor, we take care of them, not you. Correct? So far, so clear. Now suppose somebody attacks. We will spend on defense and you will spend along with us. Both of us will spend for the sake of the protection of Medina. And at times of crises, therefore, the two shall unite and help one another, and the Yahud are responsible for the costs and the Muslims are responsible for the costs. The Prophet ﷺ also added here with regards to the Yahud, no Yahudi can leave Medina without the permission of the Prophet ﷺ. You cannot, now leaving Medina, what does it mean to leave Medina? Remember, this is not a time where we just move for any reason, for our job. No, leaving means changing your citizenship. That's what it means in that language, right? Because again, this is a very different time and place. Where you live is where your tribe, is where your loyalties, is where your passport, it's all the same. Right? For us, we have a whole different concept. Now you have to realize, for them to leave Medina basically means renouncing citizenship, joining another camp. So the Prophet said, you cannot just do that. You have to inform us, you have to tell us. This must be informed so that we know that you're no longer a part of this treaty. And by the way, to this day, if you want to give up your US citizenship or any citizenship, you must renounce it. If you take up another citizenship and you want to give it up, you need to go to the consul director of whatever country you're in and publicly and basically disavow and give back your citizenship. Similarly, the Prophet is saying, if you want to give up this, you need to tell us. Or else you cannot pretend to be a part of ours and another as well. So any Yahudi who wants to leave, he must inform before he does so. Another clause, if any Jew wishes to follow the believers, i.e. to convert, if any Jew wishes to convert, then he shall be helped and protected, and no injustice shall be done to him. I.e., nobody can harm him. He has the right to embrace our faith. Nobody can harm him if he wishes to embrace our faith. So these are some of the clauses related to the Yahud. Some of the clauses related to the pagans, the mushrikun. And this shows us that as soon as the Prophet immigrated, there were still mushrikun in Medina. We said this many times. There were still mushrikun in Medina, and they lasted up until the battle of Badr, when the Prophet returned back to Medina. When the Prophet returned back victorious from the battle of Badr, that was when every single mushrik realized that we are such a small minority and now the Prophet has won, we need to convert. So that was when the munafiqun became munafiqun, right? Because before this they were mushrikun. Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, this is when he converted after Badr. All of these people converted after Badr. When this treaty is taking place, it's not Badr yet. So there are still pagans. So what does the Prophet ﷺ say? No mushrik shall offer protection to the Quraysh, even if it is in return for life or money. Nor shall he in any way come between the Quraysh and the believers, i.e. to defend. I.e. the mushrikun are being told, and this is, how fair is this? Wallahi, how fair is this? The Prophet is not saying you have to convert. Look at this, they are pagans, they're idol worshippers. He's not saying you have to convert. What he is saying is, your ties of loyalty might feel towards the pagans. Realize, if you're in Medina, you cannot support them physically. What's in your heart is in your heart. But you cannot support them, nor can you defend them, nor can you come between us and them. Stay out of this business. Stay out of international affairs, basically. Or you can call it affairs between Mecca and Medina. And this shows us that the Prophet in that stage allowed the mushrikun to be in Medina. Later on the madhahib differed. Is it allowed for idol worshippers to be living in Darul Islam? This theoretical issue doesn't apply anymore, but once upon a time there was a controversy. Everybody agrees that Ahl Kitab can live in Darul Islam. Everybody agrees that the Majus, the Zoroastrians, the Parsis can live in Darul Islam. That's what our Sharia clearly allowed. Nobody disagrees about this. There was a controversy, should we extend the same privileges and rights to idol worshippers? And some of the madhahib said, yes, we should. And this is also the Hanafi madhab. And as you know, the Mughal emperor was a Hanafi madhab predominantly. And that's why it's possible to be a Hanafi and a Mughal emperor. Otherwise, it would not be possible to do that. Whereas some of the other madhahib were stricter in this regard. And they said, no, this extension is only given to the Ahl Kitab and the Majus. That's the theoretical issue. But of the evidences of the Hanafis is here, that the Prophet ﷺ allowed the mushrikun. The final set of clauses were general clauses pertaining to all of the people of the treaty. All of the people of the treaty. And these general clauses are, number one, the Prophet ﷺ said, the interior of Yathrib, once again using the term Yathrib, is a haram for the people of this treaty. We talked about this 2-3 weeks ago. What does a haram mean? Haram means sacred land. Haram means that which is halal outside becomes haram inside. That's what haram means, right? That which is halal outside becomes haram inside. So haram means sacred because of this. And of the things that are sacred or of the things that are not allowed, who can remind me? We went over a long list 3 weeks ago. What is? No weapons. No weapons that are unsheathed, unsword. You know, of course, you're going to have weapons in your house. You cannot brandish, you cannot take it out. What else? Plucking. Plucking what? Plucking trees, hunting.
Can't build.
Can't what?
Can't build.
No, you can build. You cannot destroy trees to build. So these are some of the things that are haram. These are some of the things that are haram. The Prophet ﷺ is saying the interior of Yathrib is a haram for the people of this treaty. And he also delineated or demarcated what is Medina. And I mentioned before, the Prophet said, Al-Madina tu haramun ma bayna ayrin wa thawr. And in another hadith, ma bayna labbatayha. So he mentioned 4 points, labbatayha and ayr and thawr. Ayr and thawr are two small mountains. Two small mountains, south and north of Medina. Ayr and Thawr are two small mountains, south and north, and Labbatayha are the two Harratain, are the two volcanic plains, which to this day in Medina is called Harra Sharqiyya, Harra Gharbiyya. To this day, there are areas that are called Sharqiyya and Gharbiyya. That's the Harra. So the Prophet ﷺ demarcated 4 points, and he specified these 4 points are what make Medina haram. Outside of this is not a haram. These are the 4 points. He also said, part of these clauses, whatever disagreement occurs between the peoples of this treaty, which shall lead to internal fasad, shall be decided by Allah and His Messenger. Muslims and Jews, Jews and pagans, pagans and Muslims, anybody's having a conflict, then it shall be decided by the Prophet ﷺ. He said Allah and His Messenger. It shall be decided by Allah and His Messenger. And this shows us the ultimate basis of Islamic law, which is submission to the Quran and to the Sunnah. Also, the Prophet said, it will not be allowed for any believer who agrees to this treaty and believes in Allah and the last day to help any rebel, anybody who opposes this treaty, to support him, Whoever does so will have the la'na of Allah and the malaika and all of mankind. Whoever does so, Allah will curse him and the angels will curse him until the day of judgment, and no good deed will be accepted from him. In other words, to be a traitor to Medina or to Yathrib, to be a traitor to this clause will entail permanent, and this of course meant also execution, that you cannot disagree with or you cannot strive to harm the people of this treaty. And the final point that he mentioned in this long treaty, that whoever leaves Medina shall be safe, whoever stays in Medina shall be safe, except for anyone who does an injustice or sin. And Allah will protect those who are pious and righteous, and Muhammad ﷺ is his messenger. That's how the treaty concludes. Whoever leaves Medina shall be safe, and whoever enters shall be safe, as long as they haven't done a crime. In other words, you leave peacefully, you come peacefully. We're not going to harm you. You may leave and come and go as you please, as long as you haven't done a crime. If you've done a crime, then that's obviously we're going to take care of that, and Allah will protect those who are pious and righteous, and Muhammad ﷺ is his messenger. What are some of the overall benefits or points? What is the status of this treaty? Well, let's talk about some of the misinterpretations, if you like, and then we can figure out what is the proper status. Some people, they exaggerate the importance of this treaty, and others diminish the importance, which is the standard case of everything, ifrat and tafrit. Some people go to one extreme, others go to the other extreme. There is a paper that was written back in the 80s by one of our leading Muslims here in America, where he basically said, it became famous at the time, I'm sure many of you here are not aware of this now, but back then it became very famous in Muslim circles, where he basically said that this treaty was the basis of the American Constitution. Thomas Jefferson got the idea of America from this treaty. Right, and I'm not joking. This is a paper that is written that by one of our academic leaders of North America, and this is, of course, I mean, this type of mentality. I mean, it's to me a sign of an inferiority complex, to be honest. That everything that is good, you somehow have to link it directly to we did it, we invented it, right? And this is simply not just unacademic. You become laughing stocks of the people. People start making fun of you, right? It's something that is ludicrous. Now, there's no question that the treaty for its time was very novel, very unique, that certain concepts of it were then exported to the West, and the West then took these concepts and eventually evolved. And yes, but this is like, 20 degrees of separation or something. You cannot just say that Thomas Jefferson read this treaty and he wrote the Constitution based upon it. Well, like this is, I mean, it makes us laughing stocks, right? Because they're so different. There's the content, the whole is very different. So this is one, if you like, extreme. Another extreme are those who try to, the non-Muslims who try to read in evil intentions, astaghfirullah, of the Prophet ﷺ, that he wants to make the Yahud a separate nation, and he wants to, because we're going to come to now in a few weeks, the concept, it's a very delicate, we need to talk about it very frankly. The accusation that the Prophet ﷺ treated the Jews unfairly is a common accusation, right? In fact, it is understood by non-Muslims. It's not even an accusation anymore. For them, it's a fact. For them, it is a fact that, astaghfirullah, he had it in his mind. He just had something. Of course, anti-Semitism is used here, right? And so they say this treaty is anti-Semitic, because the Prophet is dividing the Yahud, separating them, putting obligations upon them, etc., etc. And obviously that's not the case, because the same obligations on them are on the Muslims, exact same. Literally exact same. You must take care of your own poor. You must take care of your own blood money, your own ransom, etc., etc. So this is one extreme. And of course, as usual, the truth is in between the two extremes. And the truth is that this treaty was very significant. It had a lot of long-range implications, and that it established the basis of how an Islamic state is run. It established the overall philosophy of how an Islamic state is run. Of the most important concepts that this treaty puts into writing, literally, it puts into writing. And of course, we've been talking about this a lot, but now for the first time it's being written down as a constitution. Of the first, if you like, important things about this is that the Prophet ﷺ is defining relationships based upon theology. And this is completely unique in the history of Arabia. Because he said, the Banu Auf, the Banu Amir, basically the Ansar and the Muhajirun are one ummah. We don't have differences amongst ourselves. In terms of being treated equally, we are one ummah. And anybody who converts to the faith will become a part of this ummah. So what is happening? The old system of lineage, of tribalism, of you are who your father was, is being broken. And now you will be who you are, depending on your theology and your religion. Nobody has any right to come in between you and being a full-fledged member of the ummah if you wish to convert to the faith. And this, of course, is something we take completely for granted now, and that's how we view the world. But at that time, it was, of course, very unprecedented. And the concept of ummah being one block or one group of believers, regardless of who your father is. Bilal and Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr is a very noble lineage. Bilal and Abu Bakr are the same. This is unprecedented. Of course, we know this, but the process was putting in writing now. It doesn't matter where you come from. We are one ummah. And by the way, the word ummah, of course, Allah says in the Quran, وَإِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً, right? Allah says this is the word ummah. The word ummah, what does it mean? What does it come from? The word ummah comes from And what does mean? Everybody knows, even the non-Arab knows, right? Means mother. And why is ummah from What has mother got to do with ummah? Well, the word actually, even more deeper than this, the word actually comes from amma. And amma means to? La. La. This is a derived meaning. This is a derived meaning. Secondary meaning. It's not the asl.
Like went to or a goal or a destination?
Amma means to strive for. Yes. To strive for وَلَا آمِينَ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامِ. Allah says in the Quran, right? آمِينَ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامِ. That you are intending to get there. So amma means qasada. Amma means to aim for. Amma is basically the object of your attention. Therefore, when the child is born, what is the one object of attention? Right? When the child is born, there's one object of love and whatnot. It's All of the attention is to the So is mother. Therefore, the ummah are those people who they might as well have one mother. The bonds between them, they might as well just have one mother. Because that's where they're all coming together from. Right? Of course, the word amma is so deep, so the imam is also the one who is the one leading you in prayer, because again, he is the one who has that leadership role. Ibrahim is called ummatan, even though he's one person, because of the quality of his iman. He might as well be a whole ummah by himself, right? The word ummah has now over 15 derived meanings, but the original meaning of amma is qasada. So the point being that the word ummah comes from because the people of the ummah, it's as if they have one It's as if they're so bonded together, they are one group or one nation or one family, literally. One family to the exclusion of all the others. This treaty also demonstrates the justice of the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ, contrary to what the non-Muslims say, in fact, he treated the Jews with the utmost respect, and he gave them their full rights. And from our perspective, they were the ones, at least in the period of Medina, who refused to take these privileges, who kept on making things difficult for themselves. And we're going to come to this throughout the course of the next few months and even a few years, inshallah, when we talk about this, what the Yahud did and how the Prophet ﷺ reacted to that. From our perspective, there is no anti-Semitism. From our perspective, they were treated the way they were treated because of things that they had done, not because of who they were. And this is not anti-Semitism, right? They were treated because of crimes that they had done. Either they're expelled or whatnot because of issues they had done, not because of who they were. If the Yahud had fulfilled this treaty, and they had outwardly lived up to it, the fact of the matter is they would have been shown the utmost honor and they would have benefited the most. Why? Because the Yahud had a lot of things they were doing in Medina. They were tradesmen, they were jewelers, they were craftsmen, they were businessmen. They did a lot of traveling and finances and whatnot. And the success of the Muslims would have meant their success as well, because they're a part of the community. The raising of the Muslims would have meant their raising as well. The financial input of the Muslims would have meant their financial success as well. And if they had lived up to this treaty, they would have risen along with the Muslims. But from our perspective, and this is what we're going to prove, they didn't live up to it. And they reneged on the promises. They broke these promises, and because of this, the promise was very clear. Do not side with the pagans against us. And that's exactly what the Banu Qurayza did. That's exactly what they did. This is a promise that is being given the first month they moved to Medina. Don't side with the pagans. And yet the Banu Qurayza did that. So what was coming to them was coming to them, right? Similarly, any issue between Muslims and Yahud will be dealt with by the Prophet ﷺ. And both of the other tribes, they transgressed upon the Muslims, murdering or whatnot, or dishonoring a lady of the Muslims, as we're going to come to. This was an intra-ummah. The Yahud and the Muslims are getting involved with each other. So they have to go to the Prophet ﷺ for the final reference, and that's exactly what happened. Another benefit of this treaty is that we are seeing that the Prophet ﷺ's political status has now become a de facto leader. And this is a key point here. He was invited by a group of Muslims. Now these Muslims are so numerous that he can negotiate treaties on their behalf and become the de facto ruler. Even the mushrikun and the Yahud, they are told that you have semi-independence, basically. Right? You have semi-independence, but if something happens that deals with us, you must come to the Prophet ﷺ. And this clearly shows who's in charge, right? And therefore what the treaty did was to make official what was understood before this, and that is that the Prophet ﷺ is the de facto or the accepted ruler of the city of Medina. Now somebody will say there's no jizya mentioned, and there is no jizya mentioned. There is no jizya mentioned here. And the response to this is the laws of jizya had not yet been revealed. Jizya was revealed in Surah Tawbah. حَتَّى يُعْتُوا الْجِزْيَةَ عَنْ يَدٍ. This is Surah Tawbah. So that is much later on. And therefore, this treaty does not contradict jizya, but it doesn't enforce it either. In that, there's no clause there because the concept of jizya has not yet come. Also, one of the main benefits of this treaty that we derive, especially living in the century that we're living in, and this is the reality of Islam without any political correctness, without any appeasement. As you know me, I'm not one of those who wants to appease anybody. The fact of the matter, which is absolutely true from our Sharia, is that freedom of religion is guaranteed by the Sharia to a great extent, not to an unlimited extent. We have to be fair here. Classical Sharia, or classical Islamic fiqh, I should say, did not give the types of freedom that the modern secular world gives. The non-Muslims did not have the right to preach and convert others. You have the right to do as you're doing, but you cannot convert others to your faith, right? But apart from that, pretty much everything else is allowed for you. The irony of ironies is that we are accused of being intolerant, and we are accused of not allowing other faiths to, the freedom, and yet, wallahi, without any mujamala, without any political correctness or whatnot, if you compare our track record with theirs, it's unbelievable how they could have the audacity to say that we are religiously intolerant. It's unbelievable, and we need to be very familiar with this, that we cannot allow people to make fun of our faith in this manner when they don't even know their own faith. They have no right to tell us that our faith was intolerant when Western powers and Western nations, frankly, were the most religiously intolerant in the history of humanity. And I'm not being, this is a fact. Even the Chinese, even the Mongolians were more tolerant than Western countries were. when it comes to religious differences. And this is something any neutral observer can mention. I mean, this goes back even to, forget the Roman emperors persecuting the Christians, even when Constantine converted to Christianity, right? Constantine is the first Christian emperor. When he converted to Christianity, what's basically the first thing he did? He adopted a version of Christianity, which is now the official version. All types of Christianities go back to Constantine. He outlawed all other Christianities, Christianities that actually had truth in them. Those that believed Jesus Christ was the Messiah, not the Son of God. Those that believed that Christianity is not a new religion, because most of the Christian converts were Jews. And for them, Christianity was Judaism with believing in Messiah, which is what we believe, right? Constantine came along. You should know all this, by the way, because we live in this environment. Constantine came along and he adopted a narrow interpretation of Christianity. He made it the state religion. Then what? He outlawed and banned anybody who disagreed with him. And that is why people had to flee. This is the beginning of Christian persecution by other Christians, right? Constantine forced everybody who disagreed to either, be killed by the sword or get out of here. So Arius, who was the main opponent of Constantine, and Arius did not believe in the Trinity. Arius did not believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. Arius's version of Christianity is very similar to Islam. Very similar. And Arius was the main opponent of Constantine. Arius had to run away and go down south. And it is said that he went down to what is now Abyssinia. And it is said, therefore, that the ruler of Abyssinia was aware of, it is called the Arian, the creed, Arian creed, because Arius is the name of the person. So this is beginning. Throughout medieval times, the church killed, and I'm not exaggerating, millions of people. The Catholic Church. We're not talking about Jews, we're talking about fellow Christians. Right? The Roman Catholic Church could not tolerate dissent. Before Martin Luther, they already had started killing. There were so many different groups that came about at that time. There was a group called the Huguenots, the Anabaptists as well in Denmark and whatnot. Again, 20, 30,000 people killed. The wars that took place between the Catholics and the Protestants. Even Martin Luther had to run away. Why did Martin Luther run away and go to Switzerland? Because the Roman Catholics wanted to kill him. Right? This is not intolerance of another religion. This is intolerance of their own religion. And it is ironic that somebody like even John Locke is 1689, 1690 or so. John Locke is the main intellectual whom the founding fathers of this country read. And American political science is basically Lockean in nature. How we view, or how America views political science, is from John Locke. John Locke's writings were read by Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Adams, all of them. They read John Locke and they consider him to be the greatest philosopher of the time. John Locke is actually criticizing his fellow Christians for their intolerance, right? And he is saying that, why don't you look at the Ottomans, or the Turks he called them. The Turks allow people of different sects and different faiths to come and live. Why do you have to be intolerant amongst yourselves? Look, he is putting the Ottomans as the role model. Can you believe this? Right? This is John Locke writing that, why don't you look at the Turks? And he's writing at a time when, of course, people are not being tolerant of other types. As you know, our founding fathers, why did they come to America? Why did they flee? Because of religious persecution. Who was persecuting them? People of their own background, right? And therefore, John Locke is writing that, why don't you look at the Turks? They allow people of all different Christianities, all different creeds, Jews to come and live amongst them. There's an amazing testimony about the reality of how the Sharia views the freedom of other faiths. Also in this treaty, getting back to the treaty now, we notice an interesting point, and that is the semi-independence of every single group of people. The Prophet ﷺ said, the Yahud are their own ummah, they take care of themselves. We're not going to interfere. The Muslims are their own ummah, and of course the Prophet ﷺ is going to solve their issues, and the mushrikun are their own. And this is amazing, because what the Prophet ﷺ is giving them is, he's giving them almost independence within the state of Islam. Almost independence. You are responsible for yourself. You're responsible for your own affairs, your positives and your negatives, right? Your crimes and your issues, all of it will be dealt with internally. However, the Prophet ﷺ said, when it comes to the issues of the state, when it comes to the issues of the entire community, now we are one group. And therefore, some have said, and these are all modern terms, so to try to read them back it has its positives and negatives. Some have said that the system of the Prophet ﷺ is a federalist system. By this, what is a federalist system? That basically there's semi-independence. Right? The Prophet ﷺ was not going to get involved in the affairs of the Jews. He wasn't going to get involved in the affairs of the idol worshippers. They are semi-independent unless they have an affair that is domestic in nature. If an external threat comes, then we will be united. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. If the pagans attack, we will be united. And everyone will send forth its army or its troops or its financing. We will all come together. And it is true to say that this type of government was unique in the world at the time. It is true to say this, right? And there's an element of truth, therefore, that this type of concept was later exported to other places and areas, and then things develop from there, as I already said. So, the type of government that the Prophet ﷺ instituted was one that was pretty minimal when it came to the state getting involved in the direct affairs of the quote-unquote citizens, right? Because that will be independent upon every single tribe. And that's a very interesting notion, which is, as I said, similar even a little bit to how America has the various states, if you like, even, right? The minutiae will be dealt with the states. Of course, in those days, there weren't states, there were tribes. And so the chieftain of the tribe will take care of his own internal affairs, and the Prophet ﷺ will take care of the entire area of Medina. Another, of course, benefit, we already know this for now, it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim. If you do an injustice, a wrong, a dhulm, you're not going to be protected. If you steal, if you cheat, if you lie, the Prophet ﷺ said, even if they are a Muslim, anybody who does a crime or a sin, then he shall be dealt with. Simply being a Muslim will not get you off the hook. And he actually, the part of the treaty says, all of the Muslims will be united against him. No one can shelter a murderer. No one can shelter a criminal. Somebody who has committed a crime, everybody has to unite against the crime, regardless of whether they're a pagan or a Muslim or a Jew. It doesn't matter. Crime is crime regardless of the religion of the one who committed it. Again, these are novel ideas for the time. It was unheard of for the time. The Prophet ﷺ is being very forward-thinking in this regard, of course. Another thing that some people have derived here from this treaty is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ accepted the legal norms and the customs of every tribe. In Arabic, this is called urf. He accepted the urf, or the legal customs of every tribe, as long as it did not conflict with the Sharia. And he allowed the tribes to deal with their own internal laws, as long as it didn't conflict with the laws of the Sharia. And of course, one of the primary principles of our religion, I've said this before, every one of you should be aware, there are 5 major qawa'id fiqhiyya, or rules of fiqh that govern fiqh. There are 5 major rules that govern all of fiqh. One of them is al-urfu muhakkam, and that is, in the absence of a shari'i ruling, the culture of a people will be given precedence. In the absence of a shari'i ruling, the culture, how they typically interact with one another, this will be given precedence and taken into account. Al-urfu muhakkam. How people interact with one another, the Sharia in fact does take this into account, and I've given some examples of this in previous talks that we've given about the seerah. Now, from this treaty, let us now take a look back and see what exactly has occurred since the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ comes, the first thing that he does is he builds a masjid. And the masjid is, of course, the basis of tawheed, the fundamental of religion, reminds them of the purpose of life. He then establishes the bonds between the muhajirun and the ansar. Firstly, even before the treaty, by physically pairing them together, right? The mu'akha, we talked about that. The mu'akha, literally pairing them together. And then, the third point, he then makes this entire treaty where he ratifies the status of the mu'minun, the status of the Yahud, the status of every single group, and he then forms the first Islamic state, or the first, if you like, federation, and how it will interact with one another. There's more to be said, inshallah, we'll continue.
وانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا بك